Well, I'm going to suggest we get started. And maybe you that at the back wouldn't mind coming forward, since we got lots of empty seats here. And, don't be worried about the slim crowd. This is the third time I've given this message. So people who have been real eager to hear this have heard it already. And just to introduce myself, I'm an astrophysicist, but I've also served as a pastor for the past 30 years. And my voice sounds a little slurred. Please excuse me. I just had emergency dental work done, and I'm still quite frozen. I didn't know, but there's a dentist that owns a Pananoia hotel, and he very graciously took care of me. So this morning I was in excruciating pain. Now I'm just numb. But we'll get started. I'm the president of Reasons to Believe. You have an announcement to make? Yeah, go ahead. But yeah, what we're about at Reasons to Believe is presenting the latest new evidences for the God of the Bible. Ours is an organization that uses the new reasons, new scientific discoveries that give additional evidence for the God of the Bible as a tool for helping non-Christians to make a bridge from these reasons that they're interested in to the traditional reasons that really have the impact of bringing people to faith in Christ. And it's in astronomy where we see the most potent scientific evidences for the God of the Bible. And if you caught the morning seminar, it's because astronomy is that one discipline, the only scientific discipline, where you're directly witnessing the past. So it's in astronomy where we have a direct window on the creation event itself. So that explains why it's in astronomy we're getting the most compelling scientific evidences, not just for the existence of some ill-defined God, but literally the God of the Bible. And I'm going to give you a quick survey, and this is going to come fairly quick for you. If you want it slowing down, you'll find it in my book, The Creator and the Cosmos, which is over on the table there. And we also have a DVD called Journey Towards Creation, which takes you through some of this evidence. But primarily today, I'm going to try to focus on those evidences that have been discovered literally within the past few months. Astronomy is a discipline where literally every day there's new scientific proof for the God of the Bible. And we can just get this set up. Yeah, here we go. I started studying astronomy when I was 7 years of age. In fact, I knew from the age of 8 onwards that my future career would be in astrophysics. I just had this passion to learn everything I could about the universe. And I read a book on cosmology. That's the science of the origin and the structure of the universe by Fred Hoyle when I was 7 years old. And in that book, Fred Hoyle described how he had been raised in the Anglican Church in England and just his bitter experiences with that Anglican church, and said he wanted nothing to do with the Christian faith. On the other hand, he acknowledged that the Christian faith, based on the Bible, that the Bible amongst the world's holy books says the most about the origin and structure of the universe. And he said in that book, in spite of his opposition to the Christian faith, that the Bible's content on cosmology was truly amazing. And there are 3 things he noted that the Bible said about cosmology. Namely, that the Bible claims that there's an ex nihilo beginning, an actual beginning of the universe out of nothing, that the universe continuously expands from that point of beginning, and it's a universe that gets colder and colder as it gets older and older. And most of you probably realize these are the 3 fundamental elements of all the Big Bang creation models. And that explains why Fred Hoyle was so opposed to the Big Bang theory all of his life, because he recognized how it supported the Christian God, and that was a Christian God he was not prepared to accept. Well, I would imagine that you're all aware of the several verses in the Bible that talk about the cosmic singularity beginning. That term singularity is what physicists and astronomers refer to as the universe being traceable back to a single event, a singularity which means the actual beginning of everything, the beginning of all matter, energy, space, and time. The most famous verses would be Genesis 1:1, 2:3, and 2:4. They're repetitive. They basically say the same thing. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, as far as Hebrew nouns are concerned, almost every one of them has multiple literal definitions. This morning we heard a debate about how the word translated day in Genesis 1 has got 4 different literal definitions. Well, the word for earth that is used has 5 different literal definitions, and the word heavens has 3 different literal definitions. However, the term Shamayim Eretz, heavens and earth, is a compound Hebrew noun, a lot like the English word butterfly. A butterfly is a compound noun. It's got nothing to do with butter, it's got nothing to do with a fly, but when it's hooked together, it means something very different. Likewise, Shamayim Eretz means something very different than the other 8 dimensions. It means the entire physical universe, all of physical reality, encompassing all matter, energy, space, and time. And the text says that God created. The Hebrew verb that's used there is bara, which means to create something brand new out of, the brand new that did not exist before. It's only used 3 times in the book of Genesis, once for the creation of the physical universe, the second time for the creation of the soulish creatures, and last of all for human beings. So we have the physical, the soulish, and the spiritual, the brand new aspects of God's creation. Isaiah goes into more detail about this transcendent beginning. I don't have the verses up here, but the Apostle Paul in 2 Timothy and in Titus speaks about how there's an actual beginning to time itself, and the beginning of the universe is the beginning of time, and Romans 8 would tell us it's the beginning of space and time. John 1:3 and Colossians 1 make the point that there's nothing that exists that wasn't created by this transcendent creator, working beyond matter, energy, space, and time. And finally, Hebrews 11:3, the universe that we can detect was made from that which we cannot detect. Well, we now live in a day and an age when we can prove that the universe indeed has this biblically described cosmic singularity beginning. And the proof began in 1970 with the publication of this paper, The Singularities of Gravitational Collapse and Cosmology. And it was this research paper that launched Stephen Hawking to worldwide fame. He won the Wolf Prize in Mathematics for this. And the reason why this was considered such a hallmark paper is because it's a mathematical theorem for the universe, and it's a mathematical theorem that is very general in its scope. It only has 2 assumptions. Assumption number 1, the universe contains mass. Assumption number 2, the equations of general relativity reliably describe the dynamics of the universe. What this paper proves is if those 2 assumptions are correct, then there must be an ultimate beginning for matter, energy, space, and time. All 4 be created at the beginning of the universe. And moreover, there's a corollary in this theorem which states that the beginning of matter, energy, space, and time is brought about by a causal agent working outside or independent of matter, energy, space, and time. Now, neither Stephen Hawking or his co-author Roger Penrose were aware at the time they published this paper that their description of this causal agent is unique to the God of the Bible amongst the religions of the world. In this sense, that when you look at, say, the Eastern religions of Hinduism and Buddhism, the various New Age philosophies, there we have God or gods creating within space and time that always exists. But the God of the Bible is a God that creates independent of space and time. And so these space-time theorems of general relativity really do isolate the God of the Bible from the gods of the other major religions of the world. Now, at the time this paper was published in 1970, astronomers were only able to demonstrate the reliability of general relativity to 2 places of the decimal, to 1% precision. And it was not enough to convince the skeptics. And so Stephen Hawking himself was skeptical that we're looking at this transcendent causal agent. After all, general relativity may not be reliable. But what has happened in the intervening 35 years is that the astronomical community has moved from 3 independent tests of the theory of general relativity to 13. And we've moved from 1% confirmation to better than 0.1% confirmation. And in the last few months, we've gone one step further. What has happened in the last 5 months is astronomers now have available for observation 3 binary neutron stars. Now, it was a single binary neutron star that enabled us to prove the reliability of general relativity to 14 places of the decimal. But what happened in the early part of 2005 is astronomers discovered 3 more of these binary neutron stars. And you might say, well, what is a binary neutron star? Well, that would be 2 supergiant stars that have collapsed down to become, instead of balls of gas that are millions of miles in diameter, they now become solid crystals of neutrons. Where it would be 1 million miles in diameter, today it's only 10 kilometers across. And with 2 of these neutron stars, say these are 2 neutron stars, where they're orbiting closely around one another, what you have are gravitational forces 1 million times stronger than anything we observe elsewhere in the universe. And general relativity actually predicts that 2 neutron stars will slowly spiral in towards one another and merge and become a black hole. And astronomers can actually measure that degree of merging. And it's by that means that we get our most convincing proofs that general relativity indeed reliably describes the dynamics of the universe. And it is such that in June of 2005, general relativity now ranks as the most exhaustively tested principle in all of physics, and it's the best proven principle in physics. It's better proven than Newtonian mechanics, which means there's no longer any basis for doubting the reliability of general relativity. And where there's no basis for doubting the reliability of general relativity, then indeed we have this causal agent creating space and time independent of space and time, as the Bible describes God's cosmic creation activity. Now, the one criticism of this analysis that comes from my peers is that they will say, yes, but this theorem only applies for classical general relativity. It doesn't take into account the possibility that in the very early history of the universe, quantum mechanics might play a significant role. Well, what has happened since this paper has been published is a number of theoretical physicists have produced space-time theorems that take into account these quantum gravity possibilities. And we don't know yet which of the quantum gravity models is correct. But what has happened is theoreticians have published theorems about all possible quantum gravity models. And every single one of them gives us the same conclusion, that there's this actual beginning of space and time and a causal agent beyond space and time. And therefore, what we're observing is that astronomers learn more and more about the universe. The strength and number of general relativity proofs is growing, and that the theorems are becoming more and more generally applicable. Now, it is true that there are some physicists that are developing cosmic creation models that don't have a singularity beginning. However, they're in the category of being called unreasonable cosmic models, in the sense that the only way you can get around this singularity is to hypothesize that instead of having positive energy, there's negative energy in the universe, or that there's a violation of the second law of thermodynamics. And one thing we know for sure, there's no way you can have astronomers if the second law of thermodynamics does not apply to the entirety of the universe. And again, this morning, I made reference to Romans chapter 8, and how it explicitly tells us in the scriptures that this law of decay applies to the entirety of the creation. Well, we astronomers now recognize that's a fundamental requirement for life, and indeed, as we observe the distant reaches of the universe, we see that that second law of thermodynamics applies everywhere we look. And this is the basis for the statement by these 2 theoretical physicists, Ford and Roman, in the Astrophysical Journal that all reasonable cosmic models are subject to the relentless grip of the space-time theorems of general relativity. And I say this because sometimes theoreticians publish models that they know have no bearing on physical reality. You say, why do they do that? Because the mathematics is fun. It really doesn't have any value other than to play around with fun mathematics with the hope that maybe that mathematics can be applied to some other area where things would be reasonable rather than unreasonable. Now, I've given this kind of message in front of audiences that are exclusively made up of astronomers and physicists, and audiences where none of them are believers. And you might be interested as to how they respond to this. I mean, after all, this is really incontrovertible evidence that someone akin to the God of the Bible created the universe. You say, how does the atheist or the agnostic wiggle out of this kind of very compelling evidence? Well, I've only heard one rebuttal, and this is the rebuttal. They'll say, okay, what you've done is proven that there's a God that creates the universe, but I'm not going to believe in this God until you can tell me who created God. And by the way, it's not just astrophysicists who come up with this rebuttal. I think every child I've ever run into in our church has asked that same question. But what's interesting about this response from the astrophysical community, of course there's a good answer to this in the pages of the Bible. But the answer is actually in the space-time theorem of general relativity. And since I'm talking to atheists and agnostics, I don't quote to them from various passages in the Bible. Actually, I do, but only after I've shown them in the space-time theorem the answer to this question, who created God? What you notice in this space-time theorem is that it's stating that there's this causal agent that brings time into existence before time exists. Now, if you were to survey a group of scientists from all the different scientific disciplines and ask them the question, what is the most generally applicable and workable definition of time that we can use to make science consistently work? And the answer they'll give you is that time is that dimension or realm in which cause and effect phenomena take place, where the effects follow after the causes. Well, that definition implies that there must be, for this causal agent, at least access to the equivalent of 2 dimensions of time. Because this causal agent is bringing time into existence independent of time. And that's a temporal phenomenon. So it tells us that the Creator, at a minimum, can operate in the equivalent of 2 dimensions of time. And if that is the case, we can conceive of time as a plane, like this sheet of paper, where you've got a length and a width. And in a plane of time, you can have as many timelines as you want in as many different directions as you please, and therefore it be possible to conceive of a creator on a timeline here that's infinitely long, that never crosses or touches the timeline of our universe over here. As such, that creator would have no beginning, no ending, and would not be created. Now, I became a Christian by looking at all the different holy books of the religions of the world to see which one was free of contradiction and which one was free of error and which one predicted future historical and scientific events. And what I noticed was the Bible is the only holy book that teaches that God has no beginning, no ending, and is not created. And that was a clue to me that the Bible could come from a transcendent source. Because if it comes from a human being, it's going to show the limitations of human visualization. We can only visualize phenomena in the dimensions we personally experience. So, for example, I can tell you as a mathematician that you can turn a basketball inside out in 4 independent dimensions of space without making a cut or a hole in the surface of the basketball. And I could prove that to you mathematically. But not one of you, including me, can visualize that phenomena or picture it in our mind. Therefore, if a religion comes from a human source, it's going to show the limitations of human visualization. So, I think that explains why we only see in the Bible the statement that God has no beginning, no ending, and is not created. That's something we wouldn't be able to visualize. But something else we see in the pages of the Bible. Psalm 90 tells us, a day of the Lord is like 1,000 years. 1,000 years is like a day. In fact, it goes on to say 1,000 years is like a watch in the night. Well, a watch is only 3 or 4 hours. That's different from a day. And so what Psalm 90 is telling us is that God can arbitrarily compress our time, or he can arbitrarily expand it as much as he wants. And in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, and yes, it's not available here. You'll have to order it from us. But in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, I give you diagrams where I show you that could only be possible for a God that's got access to at least the equivalent of 2 dimensions of time. And by the way, for what it is worth, there are doctrines in the Bible that can only be resolved if God has access to at least the minimum of 3 independent dimensions of time. That's all in Beyond the Cosmos and some of the scientific evidence in support of that. So the answer here is the cosmic creator operates the equivalent of 2 or more time dimensions. Now, one of the things we're doing at Reasons to Believe is trying to respond to this frequent challenge from academia that Christians do not have a model that successfully makes predictions. I mean, that's the charge I see in European newspapers as well as American newspapers, is that Christians, in trying to promote an intelligent designer, are not able to produce a falsifiable model that's testable or predictive. Well, for what it's worth, we're calling their bluff. We're bringing out a 10-book series that lays out our testable, falsifiable, and predictive creation model. And let me just share with you 6 predictions that we've already put into print based on this concept of a transcendent creation event. We would predict that as astronomers learn more and more about the universe, that the evidence for a single cosmic beginning will multiply. That evidence that the universe has been here for finite time rather than infinite time will grow. That the evidence for general relativity reliably describing cosmic dynamics will increase rather than decrease. In fact, there's a satellite orbiting planet Earth right now, the Gravity B probe. And perhaps by the end of the year, it's going to provide us with another proof of general relativity. Now, if we're to show that general relativity is false, I would see that as a serious challenge to our biblical creation model. See, this can go either way. If the evidence for a single cosmic beginning becomes fewer rather than greater, I would see this as a significant challenge to the Christian faith. So this is where we're kind of forcing the non-Christian academic community to come to the table. We say, these are our predictions, your predictions are the opposite. And let's wait a few weeks or a few months and see whose predictions come true. So we go on to predict that there will be more space-time theorems published by theoretical physicists, and they will show us that the grip of these theorems is more relentless than it is today. And that, bottom line, the case for a transcendent causal agent will become stronger and stronger as our physicists and astronomers continue to do the research. But one reason why I'm spending some time on this point, it forces open the door to supernatural, superintelligent design across all the scientific disciplines. Because what it is demonstrating is that we have an undeniable miracle, a miracle that no scientist can deny, the biggest we can imagine, the creation of all matter, energy, space, and time. Since this is a miracle of the greatest magnitude that no one can deny, that opens up the door for the possibility that that causal agent has performed other miracles. If there's one miracle, then no longer can you say that science must be done in a miracle-free context. That's how a lot of science is done today. But this forces open the door to say, to do science correctly, we have to be open to the possibility that the supernatural creator is intervened more than at one occasion. We've proven that possibility exists. Well, most people in the church are well aware of all the creation verses that talk about the beginning of the universe. But what I have found as a pastor is that most Christians are quite ignorant of the fact that the Bible actually says more about the expansion of the universe than it does the beginning of the universe. Now, these aren't all the passages, but these are 11 that I picked out that talk about this stretching out of the heavens. And the relevant Hebrew verb here is the verb natah. And, I wound up writing a paper with a theologian, John Ray, where he made the point that this verb natah is the best Hebrew verb to describe the continual expansion of the universe. And this is actually the Bible predicting the Big Bang creation fundamentals thousands of years ahead of any scientists. For example, 7 of these passages talk about this expansion in the cal participle form of the verb natah, which means that these texts are claiming that God on an ongoing, continual basis is expanding the universe. 3 of these passages put it in the cal perfect form, which means that when God created the universe in the beginning, he created it with the laws of physics that would guarantee ongoing, continual expansion. 2 of these passages, notably Job 9:8, makes the point that God alone expands the universe. In other words, we would anticipate, based on Job's statement, that we astronomers should find something supernatural in this expansion of the universe. And finally, Psalm 104, verse 2, and in Isaiah 42, verse 5, we have the statement, or the word picture, actually, the metaphor, that God stretches out the heavens like one would stretch out a tent. Now, the picture there is taking a crushed-up tent out of a backpack, unfurling it, and making a small home for the inhabitants of that tent. And the significant part of that word picture is the reality of the tent is not its interior or its exterior, rather it's its surface. All the stuff of the tent is in the surface of the tent. Likewise, we astronomers now recognize that the reality of the universe is in the surface, not its interior or its exterior. The universe is a lot like planet Earth. Planet Earth is a 3-dimensional body. But guess where we human beings live? We live on the 2-dimensional surface of the 3-dimensional Earth. Well, likewise, we astronomers now have demonstrated that all the stars and galaxies, all the matter and energy, resides on the 3-dimensional surface of the 4-dimensional expanding universe. And here we see the prophet Isaiah anticipating this 21st century discovery by 2,700 years. In fact, no scientist even dreamed of this concept of an expanding universe until Albert Einstein produced his theory of general relativity. That's the first time that scientists actually seriously discussed the expansion of the universe. But they were upstaged by the likes of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Zechariah by 2,500 years plus. Now, with Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity comes the recognition that gravity will work to slow down cosmic expansion. That's fairly simple to understand. What we learn in our junior high physics classes is that 2 massive bodies attract one another. And the closer they are together, the more powerfully they attract. Therefore, when the universe is young and hence small, the bits and pieces of matter will be close together, and gravity will act as a powerful brake to slow down the cosmic expansion. But as the universe gets older and older, the surface gets bigger, and therefore the objects, the matter, gets thrown farther apart, and hence gravity becomes progressively weaker as the universe gets older in its capacity to slow down cosmic expansion. Now, I was a graduate student when we were anticipating that would explain the entire dynamics of the universe. But as we made measurements of the expansion of the universe at greater and greater distances, it became obvious there is a second factor in effect. And this paper was published in 1998 by Lawrence Krauss, the chairman of the Astronomy and Physics Department at Case Western Reserve University, and probably most famous for being the outspoken atheist attacking intelligent design and creationism in the United States. But in this paper, he predicted that this second factor would prove to be dark energy, and that when this dark energy is finally discovered by astronomers, this is a direct quote from the paper, the introduction to the paper. He says, "Dark energy, if it indeed proves to be real, would involve the most extreme fine-tuning problem known in physics." Now, he goes on in the paper to describe what this dark energy is all about. And this has been in the popular press, so probably most of you have heard about it. And it's been called, say, in the London Times, the anti-gravity term in the universe. It's really more accurate not to refer to it as an anti-gravity term or an anti-gravity force, but rather an anti-elastic band effect. It's a property of that surface of the universe. And the surface acts like a gigantic anti-elastic band. And it works such that the more you stretch an elastic band, the more energy it gains to force contraction. The surface of the universe is the opposite. The more you stretch it, the more energy it gains to thrust forward even more rapid expansion of the universe. And you get the opposite prediction that you would with gravity. Namely, that when the universe is young and therefore small, the surface will be small, and therefore dark energy will be weak in its capacity to accelerate the expansion of the universe. But as the universe gets older and older, the surface gets bigger and bigger, and therefore dark energy becomes progressively more and more powerful in its capacity to stretch out the universe. Now, Lawrence Krauss in this paper explains the nature of the fine-tuning. And let me just kind of give you a heuristic description of this. Namely, that if the universe expands too rapidly, then there won't be the opportunity for gravity to collect gas and condense it into galaxies, stars, and planets. And in that kind of a universe, life would never be possible. The universe would be forever nothing but dispersed gas. But if the universe were to expand too slowly, then gravity would operate at such an efficient level that all the gas in the universe would be effectively condensed into black holes and neutron stars. And in black holes and neutron stars, matter is so dense that molecules are impossible and atoms are impossible, and therefore life is impossible. And what Lawrence Krauss demonstrates in this paper, that in order to get the stars and the planets that would allow life to be possible in the universe, not just life as we know it, but any kind of physical life, it's necessary that the mass of the universe, its value must be tuned to within 1 part in a quadrillion, 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 quadrillion. 1 part in 10 to the 60th. If it's not, there's no possibility for life to ever exist. In the case of the dark energy, the fine-tuning is much more extreme. He says in this paper it must be tuned to within 1 part in 10 to the 120th, 120 zeros after the 1. Although now astronomers recognize that Lawrence Krauss was too conservative, that really the fine-tuning is about 1 part in 10 to the 240th, 240 zeros after the 1. Now, Lawrence Krauss doesn't do this. Well, let me explain to you why this would be the most extreme fine-tuning problem for an atheist. Because we can compare that 1 part in 10 to the 120th with the very best example of human engineering design achievement. And in my opinion, that would be the gravity wave telescope that's recently been completed and put into operation in the United States. This thing required 10 years of design by Caltech and MIT physicists, and of course enormous amounts of funding from the U.S. taxpayer. And this machine has the capability of making measurements, length measurements, to 1 part in 10 to the 23. By far the best machine that humans have ever built. But this best machine that we have ever built ranks 10 to the 97 times inferior to the fine-tuning we see in the dark energy term. Now, what does that tell us about this causal agent beyond space-time, matter, and energy? Well, it tells us that that causal agent is 10 to the 97 times, or 10 trillion trillion, trillion trillion, trillion trillion, trillion trillion times more intelligent and more knowledgeable than those Caltech and MIT physicists. Now, I worked with those guys for a number of years. They're very bright gentlemen, very well educated. But we need to realize the creator of the universe is at least 10 to the 97 times with a higher IQ and at least that many times better read and more knowledgeable. But you could also argue that this transcendent causal agent is at least 10 to the 97 times better funded than the U.S. taxpayer. Now, what this tells us is we're no longer dealing with a transcendent causal force. We're dealing with an actual personal being, because only a personal being can manifest the attributes of intelligence, of knowledge, of creativity, and of power. Now, we can also use these numbers of 1 part in 10 to the 240th and say, okay, does this fit the God of the Bible? Can it fit the God of Islam? Can it fit the God of Hinduism or the God of Buddhism? And what we discover in those religions is we're dealing with a God that is distant from his creation. What we're dealing with the Christian God is a God that is intimate and caring and loving. We're dealing with a God that cares for the human species to such a high degree that that God does not consider it too expensive to build a universe of 10 billion trillion stars and carefully craft and design it for 13.7 billion years, so in this very narrow window of time, we human beings can have a nice place to live. In other words, this fine-tuning by itself isolates the God of the Bible from the gods of the other religions of the world. Now, I want to share with you some insights from another research paper. This was also published by 3 atheist physicists, 2 from Stanford and 1 from MIT. And the title of this paper is Disturbing Implications of Dark Energy. And I want to pull for you 2 quotes from the paper. Here's quote number 1. Arranging the universe as we think it is arranged, that is with a dark energy term, would have required a miracle. Now think for a minute. That's an amazing concession to come from 3 atheist physicists. But they go on to say, if this dark energy term is real, then that implies that an external agent, external to space and time, intervened in cosmic history for reasons of its own. But these 3 atheist physicists found this so disturbing. That's why they chose the paper, Disturbing Implications. They found this conclusion of an external agent performing miracles for reasons of his own so utterly disturbing that they wound up concluding in the last sentence of their paper, here it is. This is the last thing they said. This is so disturbing that the only reasonable conclusion is we do not live in a universe with a true dark energy term. In other words, they said dark energy must be wrong. After all, it's just too disturbing to have this external agent performing miracles for reasons of its own. Now, the irony was this was posted as a preprint at the Los Alamos website just weeks before astronomers came out not only with the discovery of dark energy, but the first accurate measurements. 1999 is when astronomers made the discovery of dark energy, but we had a very poor measurement of it. But even so, Science magazine termed it the greatest discovery of that year because of its philosophical implications. In fact, it's the only scientific discovery in the history of Science magazine that has won the award twice. In 2003, it also got the Breakthrough Discovery of the Year, and in this case, it was for the first accurate determination of dark energy. The WMAP, that satellite sent up by NASA to carefully measure the variations in the radiation left over from the creation event, was the first measurement that determined that dark energy not only exists, but it was able to prove that dark energy is the dominant feature of the universe, and was able to do it to 1% precision. In fact, it told us that 73% of the stuff of the universe is dark energy, with an error bar of plus or minus 1%. Now, if you go to our reasons.org website, every day we post a brand new scientific discovery that gives more evidence for the Christian faith. And over the course of about the past 8 months, we've been posting discoveries that have confirmed this dark energy to 1% precision. And what you see here are 9 independent astronomical confirmations that dark energy is not only dominant in the universe, the dominant component of the universe, but also tells us that it comes in at about 72 to 73%, plus or minus 1%. And incidentally, we archive everything. So all those discoveries are still there, and we give you hot links to the actual research papers so you can see for yourself. But with 9 independent observational confirmations of dark energy at this high degree of precision, there's no longer any basis for doubting that dark energy is real. And given that there's no basis for doubting the reality of dark energy, then we really are stuck with this external agent performing miracles for reasons of his own. And we really are stuck with a personal external agent that is orders and orders of magnitude more intelligent, more knowledgeable, more creative, and caring and loving than we human beings. Now, I would agree with Lawrence Krauss that these are the 2 most spectacular evidences for supernatural design that we have in any of the sciences. Nowhere else in the scientific disciplines do we have a numerical proof of the supernatural design that we see in the universe as we do with this dark energy term and the mass density term. 1 part in 10 to the 60th, 1 part in 10 to the 240th. Nothing else even comes close. Now, in saying that, I'm anticipating that we can get into the complex sciences of biology, that we will actually find superior evidences for design. But it's probably going to be a few decades before we can measure it like astronomers can measure dark energy and mass density. The problem with biology is you're dealing with a discipline that is so utterly complex that it's really hard to come up with these precise numbers. And so I would predict that it's going to be at least a few decades before astronomy is superseded by biology as giving us the strongest evidences for the God of the Bible. But I want to remind you that this isn't the only evidence that astronomers have. What we notice is that every single constant of physics that we measure shows evidence for supernatural design. It's not just the mass density term or the dark energy term. Those are the most spectacular. But for example, the 4 fundamental forces of physics, gravity, the strong and weak nuclear forces, and the electromagnetic force, each one of them must be exquisitely fine-tuned for physical light to be possible anytime, anywhere in the universe. Now here the degree of fine-tuning is on the order of 1 part in 10 to the 40th, or 1 part in 10,000 trillion. That still far exceeds the best that we human beings can manifest in our creative design, only 1 part in 10 to the 23. And there are others. The age of the universe must be exquisitely fine-tuned. There's only a window of time about 5 billion years wide in which bacterial life is possible. But if you're talking human life with advanced civilization, the window, according to atheists, must be narrower than 41,000 years. And our research scientists have reasons to believe and determine that it's narrower than 20,000 years. In fact, I'll be talking about this on Thursday when I'm speaking at the University of Western Hungary, how we have this anthropic principle in equality, that it takes a tremendous amount of supernatural design to make a universe suitable for human life in something less than 13.7 billion years, but the window of time in which we human beings can exist is only thousands of years wide. The velocity of light must be fine-tuned, and there are more. I'm not going to give you the whole list, but at our website, reasons.org, you will see a published list of 74 different cosmic design characteristics that testify of a superintelligent, supernatural creator. And we give you a complete list of all the research papers in support of this design evidence, so you can check us out to see that we're being honest with the data. Now, one of the strategies we use in presenting the evidence for the God of the Bible in front of educated secular audiences is we purposely start with the simple sciences of mathematics, astronomy, and physics, and then move the audience in small steps to the complex sciences of biology and anthropology. And I make mention of this because so often I see Christians going to these audiences and simply starting with the biological evidence. And again, the problem is you can't see the forest or the trees, the forest, because of the complexity of the trees. And so what we do is move in small steps. And the whole point is we want to demonstrate that as you go from the simple stuff to something that's slightly more complex, the evidence for supernatural design becomes greater. And we would expect that with greater complexity, there's greater need for supernatural intervention. So, for example, what we would typically do is move into what we call the heavenly body problem, which is that not any old galaxy will do. You need a very special kind of star. All of the gas giants in our planet must be fine-tuned. People think all you need is a planet going around a star. Not true. For life to be possible, you must have a planet like Earth orbiting exactly where it does, where you've got 4 gas giant planets of exactly the mass that we see of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune with the identical orbital characteristics. You change the orbits of any one of those gas giants by the tiniest degree, life becomes impossible on planet Earth. And so as we look at our solar system, we really realize that every feature of it has been designed to make life possible. And even though we're now observing hundreds of planets outside of our solar system, not one of them is anywhere close to having the characteristics that would make life possible. And to get into some of the specifics, you need a galaxy just like the Milky Way. If the galaxy is bigger than our Milky Way, it will generate a black hole that will shower the entire galaxy with deadly radiation. But if the galaxy is any smaller, then that galaxy will be bent by nearby galaxies, a gravitational pull and tug of nearby galaxies. And only spiral galaxies are candidates for life. Well, only 6% of the galaxies we observe are spiral galaxies. Not only that, it must be a spiral galaxy that's devoid of microstructure. And almost all the spiral galaxies we observe are loaded with microstructure. It must be a galaxy of the just right age and the just right chemical consistency. It can't have any nearby neighbors that are big. And that's one of the unique features of our Milky Way galaxy. It's nowhere close to a giant galaxy. The nearest giant galaxy is over 15 million light years away. And so that's far enough away that it's safe for life in our Milky Way galaxy. But it's also a galaxy that has lots of dwarf galaxies in its vicinity. To sustain the spiral structure long enough, it's critical that the Milky Way galaxy be eating a dwarf galaxy about once every 500 million years. And it must eat it at a very even rate. And that's not typical. The Andromeda galaxy, for example, does not eat up these dwarf galaxies at the nice even rate that our Milky Way galaxy does. And then we can look at the solar system. One of the things we notice about planet Earth, it's loaded with all the heavy metals that are necessary for advanced life. But heavy metals are extremely rare in the universe. And these heavy metals are made by 5 different kinds of objects. A type 1 supernova, a type 2 supernova, a type 3 supernova. I don't have this on here. This is a couple of months out of date. We need gamma ray bursts, and we need binary white dwarf binary stars to make fluorine. And what you need is to have, for example, these 3 different kinds of supernova all exploding at the same time in the same location relative to the new forming solar nebula. And if these supernova form too close to the solar nebula, they blow it to smithereens. But if they form too far away, you don't get enough heavy element enrichment. And the type 1 supernovae make different heavy elements than the type 2 and the type 3, and you need all 3. So you need the extraordinary situation of having a solar nebula that forms where you've got a type 1, type 2, type 3, all exploding at the same time in the same place. Otherwise, it's not going to work. And we also need to have the planet blessed with a just right gamma ray burst. Gamma ray bursts are deadly for life if they're too intense, but they're absolutely essential to make 2 of the elements we need for advanced life. Well, these are a few other features. I won't go into all the details, but also we need a just right planet Earth. If the Earth is slightly too big, it'll retain ammonia and methane in its atmosphere. If it's too small, it won't have water. It's got to be just the right distance from the Earth. And you need the just right collider and the just right moon. And we got a little video clip here to show you what we mean by the fine-tuning of the just right collider and the just right moon. And let me pull this off here so you can hear the audio. Here we go. Moon exploration enabled us to confirm that lunar rocks differ chemically from Earth rocks. Through study of lunar rocks' radioactive decay, researchers discovered that the Moon is in fact nearly 100 million years younger than the Earth. In the 1990s, a theory explaining the Moon's existence gained wide acceptance in the scientific community. According to this theory, an object the size of Mars crashed into the newly forming Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. Most of the object's mass was absorbed by the Earth, but this collision also sent up a huge cloud of dust and rocky fragments all around the Earth. In time, gravity pulled those fragments together into one solid body, the Moon. The Earth, meanwhile, lost its entire atmosphere, and a new, much thinner one began to form from gases released by Earth's crustal material. Such a collision may seem a disaster, but it proved just the opposite. It set in motion certain alterations to Earth's features that eventually made this planet a uniquely suitable site for life. The odds against a collision benefiting the eventual support of human life are staggering. The planet colliding with the Earth would need to be the right size, moving at the right velocity, striking at the right angle, made of the right materials, and occurring at the right time in the development of planet Earth. If any one of these factors were off by just a few percent, the Earth would be barren today. Unless that impact had occurred, Earth's atmosphere would be much heavier than it is, even heavier than that of our neighboring planet, Venus. Venus's thick carbon dioxide-filled atmosphere would mean instant death for all possible life. The extra mass Earth gained from the collision, along with its atmospheric revision, meant that water could exist on Earth in all three states: ice, liquid, and vapor. Okay, that's a clip from our Journey Towards Creation DVD. It's out on the table. That's where we take you on a journey from the surface of the Earth to the very edge of the universe. The idea being that the farther away you go, the farther back in time you actually see. And astronomers now have the photo images to take you all the way back to the creation event itself. And it's a wonderful way to show audiences, as you go back in time, how the evidence for the God of the Bible becomes stronger and stronger. You actually get confronted with the Creator himself once you get to that creation event. But you know, this DVD is now about 9 months out of date. And incidentally, we're bringing it out in 10 European languages. That should be available within a month's time. But what has happened in the intervening 8 months is that astronomers have discovered 3 more design features of the Moon that we didn't know about when we produced this DVD. And I'm just going to share with you one of those discoveries. And by the way, these are all posted on our website, so you can go there and check it out. And incidentally, if you'd like to get a daily email where you get a discovery every day written in layman's language about how this gives more evidence for the God of the Bible, you can sign up on our website. It's free, and we'll be happy to send you that email every day. That's something you can always share with the atheist friend that sits next to you at the office. But one of the papers we've talked about on our website is this one, published in the most recent issue of Astrobiology. And in this paper, a British physicist looks at the problem of the Moon's size. Now, one of the requirements for the Earth to have a stable rotation axis tilt is that it be a small planet orbited by a gigantic moon. Now, all the other planets in our solar system, they wander back and forth in their tilt of the rotation axis. That's one of the reasons why none of them are candidates for life. They do not have a stable rotation axis tilt. But thanks to the moon, we have that stable tilt. But what Dave Waltham has noted is that you would actually get a greater stability if the moon were about half the mass that we observe. In fact, the moon's mass is at the very top end of where you're going to get stability. And what he describes in this paper is if you make the moon just 1.5% more massive than it is, then our rotation axis tilt would go unstable. So the question he asks is there must be some reason why this moon is at the very upper end of this rotation axis stability. And he discovered it through his analysis of the orbit in the sense that this collider event we've talked about, there's a new discovery also up on our website that shows us that if you have a collision of a Mars-sized body with the Earth that makes the moon, that collision must speed up the rotation of planet Earth to about a rotation rate of 2 hours per day. Now, 2 hours per day would be deadly for all life. 4 hours a day, you can have single-celled bacteria. And indeed, that's about what the rotation rate of the Earth was when God first created bacteria on planet Earth. But if you want advanced life, you need a rotation rate of 24 hours a day. If it were to be 23 hours a day, for example, that means we would have far more deadly, destructive hurricanes and tornadoes. You'd be getting them every day, which isn't nice for advanced life. And if it's 25 hours a day, then that would mean the temperature in the daytime would be significantly warmer and the temperature at night would be significantly colder. The only way you could survive is if you lived in air-conditioned and heated buildings, which would be unpleasant and difficult to sustain advanced life. 24 hours is what you want. But in order to have the planet slow down from 2 hours a day to 24 hours a day, you need the gravitational pull of a body as big as the moon. If the moon were slightly less massive, then our planet would not be rotating as slowly as it needs to be for human life to be possible. Now you might ask, well, couldn't God just be patient and wait a few more billion years until a smaller moon were to slow it down? No, he can't. Because there's this very narrow window of time in which the sun, for example, has stable luminosity. It only lasts about 100,000 years. And so if you miss that window of time, you miss the opportunity to have human beings living on planet Earth. So it's critical that we have a body massive enough to slow down the rotation rate of planet Earth to 24 hours a day at that just right time window in which human beings would possibly be able to exist, where we'd have the stable enough conditions for humanity. So that's something brand new. And what it is showing us is that the more we learn about astronomy, the more compelling becomes the evidence for the supernatural creator. And we actually mathematically demonstrate that on our reasons.org website. What you'll see in our website is a running list of calculations of the probability of finding a planet or a moon with the capacity to support life without invoking divine miraculous intervention. And we have a calculation that dates to 1998, 2000. This is our calculation from May of 2002. And at that time, astronomers had accumulated evidence that 202 different characteristics of our galaxy and our solar system must be fine-tuned for life to be possible on our planet Earth. And the probability that all 202 characteristics would be fine-tuned to the necessary degree was less than 1 chance in 10 to the 265 without invoking divine miracles. Now, the standard rebuttal to this from atheist and agnostic astronomers is to say, well, the universe contains all kinds of planets. Well, the most optimistic estimate I've seen for how many planets the universe could contain is 10 to the 22. So I'm willing to take 22 zeros off that 265. The other rebuttal is to say, well, aren't some of these characteristics dependent on one another? After all, doesn't the mass of the moon not only factor into the rotation axis tilt, but in the slowing down the rotation rate? And shouldn't you increase the probability as a result? Well, we actually do that. We very generously take into account these dependency factors, and we're still left with less than 1 chance in 10 to the 217 that you're going to find a body anywhere in the universe that can support life, not just life as we know it, but any kind of life, without invoking divine miracles. Now, keep these numbers in mind, because what I want to show you here is what has happened in the subsequent 22 months. 22 months later, we redo our calculation. In those 22 months, astronomers have discovered an additional 120 characteristics that demand fine-tuning. We're not talking 202 anymore, we're talking 322. And we have the probability of less than 1 chance in 10 to the 282 that you're going to find one planet or moon anywhere in the universe with the capacity to support life without invoking the God of the Bible. Now, you're probably going to be talking to audiences about this. They're going to have a hard time fathoming what this 10 to the 282 really mean. So let me give you kind of a picture of what this probability, just how utterly remote that probability is. Our universe contains 100 billion trillion stars. And if you were to model a typical diameter star of 1 million miles down to the size of this orange, I'd ask you the question, how far away would you have to go to find another orange? How far apart are the stars? Well, if we were to model 1 million miles down to the size of this orange, you would find the next orange in New York City. Okay, that's how far away the stars are from one another. And we got 100 billion trillion of them. Okay, if we were to fill the entire universe with dimes, so there's no space between the dimes, maybe you need to use a different coin here in Europe. What's the typical tiny coin here in Europe? I don't know. Pardon me? A euro? How big is a euro? Like that? Okay. Well, the coin I'm talking about is no bigger than the diameter of my thumbnail. Okay, it's a small coin. If we were to fill the universe with coins that small, where there's no space between the coins, you would get 10 to the 82. So the probability of finding a body anywhere in the universe with the capacity to support life without invoking the miracles of the God of the Bible is 10 to the 200 times more remote than the possibility that blindfolded you could pick out a randomly marked dime out of a pile that fills the entire universe. That's how small this possibility is. But we're on record as predicting that that probability will get even tinier as astronomers learn more and more about the universe. But let me share with you some of the responses from the non-Christian astronomical community. Paul Davies, an agnostic astronomer, said this in his book, The Cosmic Blueprint. It seems as though somebody has fine-tuned nature's numbers. The impression of design is overwhelming. And in my book, The Crater in the Cosmos, there are copies on the table over there, I devote an entire chapter to what non-Christian astronomers say about this fine-tuning. Every one of them would agree with this consensus statement that the impression of design is utterly overwhelming. Now, they're not all saying that the designer is Jesus Christ, but they are saying we cannot deny that there is design in the universe. Well, one of the things we do when we speak about this on university campuses is put this out as a testable model. And here's a simple way you can do it. Let's suppose that our scientific team is wrong about this evidence for Jesus Christ. What would you predict? Well, you would predict the following, that the evidences for supernatural design would decrease in strength and number as astronomers continue to learn more and more about the universe, and that evidence that Christ is a designer will get progressively weaker. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we at Reasons to Believe have proven in an absolute sense that Jesus Christ is a creator. Science can't do that. Science can only demonstrate that certain things are true, plus or minus an error bar. But what we're observing is that the more we learn about the universe, the smaller becomes that error bar. And we're arguing in our books that the error bar already is small enough to eliminate the viable competition. It eliminates the God of Islam. It eliminates deism. It eliminates agnosticism. It eliminates the gods of Hinduism and Buddhism. Now, supposing that the atheists are wrong and that we at Reasons to Believe are right, then you would make this prediction, that divine design evidences will increase both in strength and number as we learn more and more about the universe, and that the evidence for Christ as a designer will get progressively stronger. In other words, that error bar will get progressively smaller. And incidentally, if you're confronted with audiences that don't like this idea of non-absolute proofs, remind them of this. Because we human beings are confined to the space-time manifold of the universe, we cannot prove anything in an absolute sense. And they say, does that mean we can't prove God absolutely? That's correct. But neither can you prove your own existence in an absolute sense. So, for example, when I married my wife, I told her on our wedding day that I was marrying her with less than absolute proof of her existence, that all I had was a high probability of her existence. But you know, now that I've been married to her for 28 years, that probability is much higher today than it was on our wedding day. And the whole point here is that we routinely make lifelong decisions based on something less than absolute proof. When the probabilities become strong enough, we realize that's equivalent to absolute proof. In fact, a rule of thumb that we have in physics, if you can prove in physics that anything has less than 1 chance in 10 to the 50th of happening, that's equivalent to proving in an absolute sense that it's impossible. And see, these numbers are way beyond that. Therefore, I would argue that there is no basis for concluding that the God of the Bible is not the creator of the universe. Now, for what it's worth, I routinely give this kind of lecture in front of audiences exclusively made up of astronomers and physicists. Matter of fact, I really don't make it a whole lot more technical than what you've heard right here. And I get rebuttals. And I want to share with you the rebuttals I get. I only get 3. Everywhere I go, I only hear 3 rebuttals. And the encouraging thing is, none of the rebuttals are scientific in nature. And some of you here I know are apologists and evangelists. When you see your skeptical audience abandon a scientific refutation with a philosophical reputation, that means you've really won the debate. Okay? They basically have conceded that the evidence is on your side. And incidentally, that's why we employ a full-time philosopher on our staff. We scientists joke with Ken Samples that the only value that philosophers serve is to help you win arguments against other philosophers. But you know what? That's a very important role to fulfill. And so if you're a philosopher, I encourage you to be studying the writings of scientists. And the problem is this: Stephen Hawking does not realize when he's abandoned science and has become a philosopher. And it takes a philosopher to help the likes of Stephen Hawking realize when he has turned philosopher. And these atheists, agnostics, and deists do that when they recognize science is no longer on their side. Okay, with that as an introduction, let me share with you the rebuttals. The first one, we really don't see it used very often anymore, but it is published in Stephen Hawking's best-selling Brief History of Time. And a lot of people have been exposed to that book. I think sales are now over 15 million copies worldwide. By far the best-sold science book. And you'll see a Carl Sagan introduction in there, and both Carl and Stephen Hawking make the point. First of all, they concede that there is some kind of God out there. It's incorrect to refer to Stephen Hawking as an atheist. He's not. He's a deist. He concedes that you need a God just to get the beauty and the elegance of the mathematics. But he insists that it's not the God of the Bible. Why? Because he says the God of the Bible is a God that does not waste miracles. And therefore God would not create 100 billion trillion useless stars. he would simply make one star, one planet, the moon, and oh yeah, you need the 4 gas giants, and you need some asteroids and comets, but the rest of it's useless, he claims. And he says that would defy the character of the God of the Bible. He doesn't waste his miraculous power. However, what they have overlooked is something in their own research. It's Stephen Hawking himself who proved that it takes that many stars to make one planet possible, given the laws of physics of the universe. Remember what I said earlier? You can't have a planet like Earth unless the universe has the mass equivalent of 100 billion trillion stars. If the mass of the universe were different by 1 part in a quadrillion, life would be impossible. So those stars are not useless. They're all critical, all necessary in order to make possible the existence of one planet in which life can exist. And incidentally, there's additional evidence here too. The mass of the universe acts as a catalyst for nuclear fusion. And so if the universe were too massive, then all the elements in the universe would be heavier than iron. But if the universe were not massive enough, then the only elements you'd have would be hydrogen and helium. Notice in both cases, no carbon, no oxygen, no nitrogen. You're missing the elements essential for life chemistry. Okay, what's rebuttal number 2? Rebuttal number 2 was extremely popular 20 years ago. And it's basically the comment, well, we wouldn't be here to observe the universe unless it had the characteristics that we see. So of course it has these characteristics. We wouldn't be here to see it otherwise. Now, this rebuttal was beautifully exposed as a philosophical fallacy by the British philosopher Richard Swinburne. And as many philosophers do, he helps his audience to see the philosophical fallacy by coming up with a word picture. And the word picture he developed was a firing squad. And let me just kind of picture it for you right here. We could take everybody in the audience and put them in these chairs in the front row and give them high-powered rifles with telescopic sights. And then we could take one remaining individual in the room, say our monitor at the back there with all those sheets that we're supposed to fill out in a few minutes, and then we could put her right here by the podium. And then we'd instruct all of you to look down your telescopic sights and kill her by putting a bullet through her heart. Well, she survives the event and looks out at all of you in the front row and says, well, of course, I wouldn't be here to observe you, all of you, unless you all missed. Richard Swinburne's point is it's not rational for such a firing squad to miss if they had intended to put her to death. The only rational conclusion to draw from the fact that she survived a firing squad incident like that is that all of you purposed that she would survive, and so you purposely aimed your rifles away from her body. Either that or someone like myself put blanks in all of your guns. In other words, the only reasonable conclusion to draw is that somebody purposed that she would be alive. Likewise, he says the only rational conclusion to draw from these amazing design features of the universe is there must be somebody out there who is a purpose for us being alive at this moment in cosmic history. But if you're watching these science documentaries on television, and by the way, they're worldwide now. As I travel around the world and I pop on the TV set, I see these documentaries all the time. It's not just the United States and the BBC that's putting them out. They're all putting them out. And it's this, the multiverse. Well, this isn't supernatural design. After all, we can conceive that there will be an infinite number of universes, all with different physical characteristics, and therefore our universe simply has these amazing design characteristics by pure chance. An infinite number of universes where all the characteristics are different, they would argue, is bound to produce one universe with all the just right characteristics. Now, I've argued in my book, The Creator and the Cosmos, that this is simply a form of the gambler's fallacy. And I'm going to illustrate this for you. I've got a coin here in front of me. It's a Canadian nickel with the Queen's head on one side and a beaver on the other side. And I'm going to flip it. Okay. you can see that it came up beavers. It came up beavers yesterday, too, and I gave this lecture both times. Beavers 3 times in a row. That's quite unusual. But what if I were to flip this coin 100,000 times and it came up beavers all 100,000 times? How many of you here would be willing to bet the Queen's head on the next flip if you saw 100,000 consecutive beavers? Well, you would if you're committing the gambler's fallacy, because you would rationalize as follows. Perhaps there are more coins in existence. What if we were to have 2 to the 100,000 people? That's 2 times 2 times 2. You've got to do it 100,000 times. Believe me, it's an enormous number. 2 to the 100,000 people flipping 2 to the 100,000 Canadian nickels 100,000 consecutive times each. The laws of statistics tell us that 1 would produce 100,000 consecutive beavers. Well, we call it the gambler's fallacy because, number one, we have no evidence that many nickels exist. And we have no evidence that that many people are flipping them 100,000 consecutive times each. And we especially have no evidence that they're producing different results. Who says the results all have to be different? Who says all the universes have to be different? Maybe you get an infinite number of universes and they're all identical, or they all fit within a certain narrow set of characteristics. And we got 5 minutes left. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up for you. In the case of the universe, the argument is actually more compelling, because you all know this isn't the only Canadian nickel in existence. But no astronomer knows that this is the only universe in existence. In fact, the theory of general relativity, the best confirmed theory in all of physics, tells us that if you have... Here we go. Supposing 2 universes exist, general relativity states that once you've got observers in universe A, the space-time manifold of that universe can never overlap the space-time surface of any other possibly existing universe, which means that astronomers have the capacity to discover only one universe, the universe in which they live. If God made 10,000 universes, they'll never know. So the sample size for these people talking about the multiverse is 1. We only have evidence for 1. And when you watch these documentaries, they talk about how they can bud all these universes from the space-time quantum foam. Well, that is true. However, the laws of quantum mechanics tell us that even though you've got all these budding buds of space and time coming out of the quantum foam, they tell us that the bigger the bud, the more massive the bud, the more rapidly it must return to the space-time quantum foam. It's part of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. And if we're talking something as massive as the universe we observe, it must return to the quantum space-time foam in less than 10 to the minus 122 seconds. Now, most of us in the audience, I think all of us, are older than 10 to the minus 122 seconds. Every life form is older than 10 to the minus 122 seconds. Therefore, it isn't a multiverse, it's a universe. The only way you can make it a multiverse is to violate the laws of physics, which means these shows should not be on the science station, they should be on the religion station. This is metaphysics, it's not physics. Now, whenever I make that point in front of an audience exclusively made up of astronomers and physicists, they do concede that the multiverse is an appeal to the gambler's fallacy, and they even concede that it's not a rational bet. But the thing that amazes me is they'll look out at me and say, you know what? We recognize this isn't rational, but we're going to go with the multiverse anyway. We're not going to go with Jesus Christ. I say, why would you do something that irrational? And the response is, well, we know enough about the Christian faith to realize this God of yours makes very high demands on our moral behavior. And we look at that demand as being so extreme, we demand extreme evidence. I said, well, okay, I grant that. It took me 2 years of a thorough study before I signed my name in the back of a Gideon Bible. However, don't you think it'd be a good idea, going back to the analogy of the coin, before you bet on the Queen's head, shouldn't you look at both sides of the coin? What if you discover there's beavers on both sides of the coin? Then you could save your money. And their response is, well, you can't do that to the universe. And my rebuttal is, yes, you can. What we can do is the same thing we would do with this coin. We would look at the coin in more detail. We would look at the universe in more detail. Every day, astronomers make at least 10 new discoveries about the universe. We learn things about the universe we didn't know the day before. Well, why don't we just simply wait a week, 7 days, and accumulate about 50 discoveries, and see if those discoveries reveal more evidence for supernatural design or less evidence for supernatural design? Or how about if we wait 6 weeks if you're not convinced in 1 week? But the whole point is we can wait that period of time, and that will tell us whether or not the universe has the equivalent of beavers on both sides that has been designed. Okay, I'm going to wrap things up, and we're going to distribute these questionnaire sheets so you can evaluate what you think of today's performance. And incidentally, these evaluations are really for the purpose of helping us improve. So if you've got some suggestions on how we can make this kind of an event better, we'd like to hear from you. And I will field some questions, but if you don't get a chance to ask questions, I'm going to have a longer Q&A time tomorrow and the following day. Every day, we maintain a telephone hotline. And so you and any skeptic you run into, they're welcome to call us and dialogue with us. And also, every week, we have a live webcast where 2 hours every Tuesday, we discuss the latest scientific discoveries, and we open up the phone lines and the email lines for any question you might have. Incidentally, our shows are all archived. If you don't have time to listen, you can go on. And by the way, 99% of our listeners do it not live, but offline. And we give you detailed show notes so you can listen to just that part you want to listen to. And, of course, there are hot links to the actual papers. And if you want to become trained by us to become a science apologist, you do not need a PhD in physics or chemistry or biology. We offer fully accredited apologetics courses. 6 currently are offered. You can see them up on our website. And it involves live interaction with both the professor and the other students. And we have a donor that is generously providing 4 scholarships for people at this conference. And I've got application sheets in my briefcase. If you want one, just let me know, and you can have one and fill it out. And finally, if you go to the book table, you notice that we're offering a free subscription to our Connections magazine that keeps you up to date on these latest discoveries. So how about we take a question? Yes?
Two-dimensional time, if I may go back to that.
Sure.
I don't understand the concept. It seems to make no sense to me, but what I want to ask is, why not just assume that the universe has a beginning and there was, before the universe, a God and no universe, and then you made the universe?
Well, my whole point was, I'm supposed to repeat the question, so I'll do that. The question is, why do we have to invoke 2 time dimensions to explain a transcendent causal agent bringing the universe into existence? What I said was 2 independent dimensions of time or their equivalent. So I would argue God does not need to do it through a second dimension of time, but he would have to do it by some means that would manifest the equivalent of that second dimension of time from the simple demonstration both in the writings of the Apostle Paul and the space-time theorems of general relativity. We got God bringing about causes before the effect of the beginning of time. So there's something that's equivalent to that. Okay. He creates space and time when he creates the universe. If the most consistent definition of time, a working definition of time in the sciences, is that dimension or realm in which cause and effect phenomena take place, where the effects follow after the causes, where you have this linear flow of time, then that establishes that we have at least the equivalent of a second dimension of time which God operates. But it doesn't mean that God does it through a second dimension of time. He could be doing it through a super dimension. And as we see in the space-time theorems, we're looking at a creator that can create space-time dimensions at will. And the Bible tells us that when evil is conquered, He's going to remove those space-time dimensions. So he can create them anytime he wants. He can remove them anytime he wants. And I don't think he's limited to just space-time dimensions. I'm prepared to conceive of super dimensions that would allow for temporal expression independent of any time dimension itself. But mathematically, we're looking at least the equivalent of 2 dimensions of time. And 2 dimensions of time is something we can break down into mathematics that we can calculate. So that's why I put it in those contexts.
Why not say there is just one time? It all existed before the beginning of the universe, and at that time,
Yeah, but then he's creating time itself. I mean,
well, you have to distinguish between metaphysical time and physical time.
if you're going to distinguish between metaphysical time and cosmic time, isn't that the equivalent of 2 independent dimensions of time? Yeah, it really is. Otherwise, you're violating the principle of causality. And that's one of the things I think is a thoroughly biblical principle, is that God does not violate the principle of causality. Right. But if you want to see this discussed in all of its philosophical glory, I've got a book out called Beyond the Cosmos, in which I talk about not only the scientific demonstration that there's the equivalent of extra time dimensions, but in fact, string theory tells us that there's 9 space dimensions that make up the universe. So now we're looking at a God that's at least powerful enough to work within 9 dimensions of space and 2 dimensions of time. Yeah, and see, that helps us understand a lot of the paradoxes we see in the Bible, how Jesus could pass through walls without putting a hole in the wall. How God can answer all of our prayers simultaneously. Simply invoking what string theory and general relativity tells us shows us how God could do it, but it doesn't show us how God did do it. God's got millions of options. But it's a powerful tool for dissuading the skeptic that the Christian faith is full of contradictions. It's not full of contradictions, it's full of paradoxes. And if we allow God to be as big as what the Scriptures say, these are not contradictions. They're only contradictions if we put God in the same limited box in which we can visualize phenomena. And that's why I would argue in the other religions of the world, there's no Trinity. You don't have a God that is simultaneously sovereign while granting humans free choice. Those are doctrines you cannot fit into a 4-dimensional box. And that's another demonstration of why the Bible alone must be the inspired Scripture from the Creator of the universe. But it's in Beyond the Cosmos. Yes. We had a question over here, or did I miss? Oh, over here.
How would you relate the anthropic principle with creation?
The anthropic principle, how do I relate that to the creation? Pardon me? Yeah, the anthropic principle. Okay, how do I relate the strong version of the anthropic principle to the Christian faith? The answer is I don't. Christianity is consistent with the weak anthropic principle, not the strong anthropic principle. And if you're not familiar with that terminology, the strong anthropic principle says the universe must take on these characteristics. The weak anthropic principle says the universe does take on these characteristics. A Christian perspective on this is that God has got options. Those taking the strong anthropic principle say that God has only one option. Now, one of the reasons why, from a Christian perspective, we can say it cannot be the strong anthropic principle is we see in the last 2 chapters of the Bible God creating a new heavens and a new earth with radically different physics and radically different dimensionality. That by itself, given that Christianity is true, demonstrates that the strong anthropic principle must be false. Now, what I'm going to do in my lecture on Thursday to the University of Western Hungary is show scientifically why we can disprove the strong anthropic principle, why we can show that there must be another universe. And actually comes through an elegant proof from an atheist that says, if we have only one universe, what does it imply? Well, it implies things that we can scientifically prove are not correct. Therefore, there must be a second universe. So it's a scientific way of disproving the strong anthropic principle. And if you're interested in this, I cover all the different anthropic principles in my book, The Creator and the Cosmos. It's something called the final anthropic principle, the participatory anthropic principle, and then I enjoy the one that's been crafted by, I forget the New York skeptic, Martin Gardner, who said that all these anthropic principles, except the weak anthropic principle, in his humble opinion, are the completely ridiculous anthropic principles, or the CRAP theory for short. So, we'll take one more, yes. So you're talking about the time limitation on human existence relative to the universe? No? Right. Okay, I think I got the point. Okay, the question he's asking is about these time limitations on these baby universes that bud out of the space-time phone. Do I have that right? Okay. And as I mentioned, if you're trying to bud something that's approximately the mass of the universe that we observe, then it must return to the space-time quantum foam at less than 10 to the minus 122 seconds. And this is well known throughout the physics community. And people promoting the multiverse will say, well, who says we're bound by the laws of quantum mechanics? And so what they conceive of is that when the universe is extremely young, because our particle accelerators can only tell us with accurate measurements the characteristics of the universe back to a time that's a millionth of a trillionth of a second removed from the creation event. They say that opens up the door that maybe things were different between time equals 0 and time equals 10 to the minus 18 seconds. So they believe that extremely tiny window of ignorance gives them permission to hypothesize very different quantum mechanical laws. And so we have different quantum mechanics in that early era, and suddenly it evolves to the quantum mechanics we see today. Now, my whole point is that's still a metaphysical jump. I mean, here's the reality of the universe. What you're doing is conceiving of something beyond the physics that we observe, and so philosophically, it's metaphysics, it's not physics. And as I mentioned in my book, Beyond the Cosmos, string theory, which now has 8 independent experimental verifications, tells us that the physics we observe today extends all the way back to t equals 0. So it actually closes the door on these metaphysical speculations. However, at that point, you can say something exotic was happening exactly at t equals 0. At that point, everybody concedes they're in the metaphysics department and not the physics department. So, and in terms of how much you've got to tweak the physics to actually get these buds to stick around a significant period of time, you've got to tweak them a whole bunch. It's not just a minor adjustment. We're talking wholesale adjustments in the physics. Okay, I think, we'll take one more question, then we'll go to dinner. Yeah. Do we have any evidence for... Do we have any evidence for the continual cooling of the universe? Yeah, I didn't have time to address that in my talk. I've actually got some visuals here. But there's a verse in the Bible, Jeremiah 33:25, that says the laws that govern the heavens and the earth are fixed. And as I mentioned this morning, we see stated in the book of Genesis that we got stars burning very early in creation, and they burn throughout today. In fact, it tells us in the Psalm that the stars are burning for very long periods of time. The whole point there is that the burning of stars is extremely sensitive to even the tiniest changes in the laws of physics. In fact, that list I gave you of 10 characteristics that must be fine-tuned, those are the characteristics that factor into the physics of star burning. And therefore, if you disturb that physics, then you're not going to have stars. So that's another demonstration that the physics is constant. Now, you saw my list of verses that the universe continuously expands. Then there's that verse in Romans 8 that says that thermodynamics pervades the entire